What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the NBA MVP race. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials in the description as well. And let's go ahead and get started. So right now, it feels like the MVP race is narrowed down to a couple of players. It's Steph, it's Kevin Durant, and it's Nikola Jokic. Steph, because the Warriors have the best record in the league, he's been playing out of his mind. Kevin Durant, from an efficiency standpoint, has been incredible. And Jokic is absolutely carrying Denver. The on-off numbers when Nikola Jokic is on the floor compared to off for Denver are out of control. Michael Porter Jr. is not playing well. Jamal Murray's not on the floor. And Nikola Jokic is single-handedly carrying this Nuggets team to a half-decent record. Those are really the three guys, I think, at the top of most people's list. But in this video, I want to talk about 5 guys that are being overlooked, that are some under-the-radar potential MVP candidates for this season as we get closer to the end of the year. And first up on this list is a guy that I actually can't even believe he's on this list, but I think secretly I'm rooting for this because it would be super, super cool. And it's DeMar DeRozan. I mean, DeMar DeRozan from a scoring standpoint, but playmaking standpoint, he's knocking down a couple of threes. He has been amazing for Chicago. And when you go back to his days in Toronto, everybody knew he was a good player. He's an all-star caliber guy. I don't know that anybody really ever took him all that seriously, though, because of some of the struggles that he had in the postseason, things that he still has to work through if Chicago does make the postseason. But then he went to San Antonio as part of the Kawhi trade. He was obviously bitter about the Kawhi thing, and he was just almost in obscurity there in San Antonio, as odd as it is to say that about a Spurs franchise that has been as consistent as they've been over the years. But I think it might have actually been the best thing for DeMar. He got out of a situation in Toronto where there was really no positive outcome. They were going to continue to lose in the postseason. He goes to San Antonio and really grows his game while also being allowed to just do what he does best. San Antonio was always going to allow him to just shoot as mid-rangers as he wanted to, but he also really grew as an on-ball playmaker, as a pick-and-roll threat, and those skills have translated really well to Chicago, where they have players that fit well around two relatively ball-dominant guys in DeRozan and LaVine. Well, you've got Lonzo, you've got Caruso, you've got Vucevic, these other guys that they have on the roster as well. And, there's a scenario here where Chicago finishes with a top 2 record in the East, and DeMar's averaging 28 a game with super high efficiency, and he potentially wins the MVP. For me personally, that would be super, super cool to see just a different name. Imagine you look 10 years from now, you look at the MVP voting, and oh, DeMar DeRozan won an MVP. That's pretty cool. Chicago has to keep up this pace. They have to be one of the top 2 teams in the East by the end of the season for DeMar DeRozan to get consideration. But I do think he's potentially an overlooked guy in the race. Next up now, you're going to talk about way obvious names, but for some reason it's not being discussed. How about Giannis? I generally don't think about, guys that have already won an MVP and it's a non-consecutive MVP year. I don't generally think about them, but I do think that Giannis is a little bit different. I think Giannis is almost in that LeBron, Steph, as we talked about earlier, potentially KD, avenue that he could actually win a non-consecutive MVP when he'd already won one before. This goes back to MVP videos that I've done in the past, because statistically, it's going to be overwhelming. Ignore Milwaukee's record right now. They're missing a ton of guys. I'm not worried about their record. They're going to be one of the top teams in the East by the end of the season. Check that box for MVP. And he might average 30, 11, and 8. His numbers are going to be absolutely out of control. He looks different. I'm terrified. I was not actually that afraid of Giannis in the Bucks and Nets series last postseason in the second round, because he wasn't playing well, he wasn't shooting well. He was obviously heavily impacting the game, but I wasn't scared of him. I'm terrified of him now. Something clicked for him after that Nets series, specifically in the finals, and he just looks different. I think it's a very typical case of a guy that wins a title, feels like everything he's done has been legitimized, and the confidence level and the belief in himself is just at an all new level. And he is, there's no other way to put it, carrying that Milwaukee team, because they're missing so many guys. And I don't know how many games he's going to end up playing as a whole. Maybe he won't care as much about the regular season, but his mindset and his demeanor says that he is going to absolutely destroy this regular season. And if Milwaukee finishes as a top 3 team, he's 100% going to be involved in the conversation for MVP. And I don't really feel like a lot of people are talking about that. Next up, a guy that's actually finished in the top 3 in MVP voting in the past, and it's Paul George. The path for Paul George is really, really clear, and it was before the season as well, but I don't know that there was a ton of MVP buzz around him. And it's just, there's no Kawhi. The rest of the roster in LA is actually not that great. And if they still finish with one of the top records in the conference, his stats are going to be really good. And it's kind of like the DeRozan thing where people were just craving something different. Like, think about the other guys we've talked about on this list other than DeRozan and Paul George so far. Giannis has one. Steph has one. KD has one. Jokic has one. If they're just craving something different, maybe Paul George comes into the conversation. Like I said, we've seen this before. He's finished in the top 3 in MVP voting before. And now that he's kind of the main guy in LA with no Kawhi, if he carries them to like 55 wins, has awesome stats, and nobody else really sticks out from an MVP standpoint, I could 100% see him potentially winning the award this year. Not to mention the two-way impact that he has, his growth as a player, some of the demons he overcame in the postseason last year. The MVP above all else is a narrative-based award, and you can check a lot of those boxes for Paul George, in that he's never won one before, but he's been close, overcame, some of those obstacles in the postseason last year, suddenly becomes the guy in LA. You can already kind of see the segment building on TV talking about Paul George's MVP case. I 100% think he is a real candidate by the end of the year, depending on the record of the Clippers. Next up, how about Jimmy Butler? I don't feel as strongly about this one as I do the other guys on the list, but I do think that he's worth mentioning, because if Miami is awesome, like if Miami is, I don't know, a 54, 55, 56 win team, it's primarily going to be because Jimmy Butler is, 1, awesome, and 2, available, which is probably what has held him back in the past from being a bit more of a factor in the MVP race. It's just his games played. But if that's not an issue this year, and he plays 70 games, and Miami is a top 2, top 3 team in the East, he's going to be heard from in this conversation. And that's really what it comes down to for every single player that I've talked about so far on this list, is what are the MVP boxes you need to check typically? Well, your stats have to be awesome, preferably historically awesome, but that doesn't always happen. Your team has to have a top 2, top 3 record in the conference, and there needs to be some kind of narrative around you. And I think Jimmy Butler can absolutely check all of those boxes. And then last up on the list, how about Joel Embiid? Nikola Jokic broke the kind of the big man curse in the MVP race. I know that Giannis is playing a lot of 5 and he's playing in the front court a lot. I don't typically think of him as a big. Maybe I should. But in terms of like a center winning the MVP, it had been a very, very long time up until Nikola Jokic won it last year. Why don't we just keep it rolling? Again, the path, the narrative is very easy to see. Let's just say that Ben Simmons doesn't play for the entire season, or he gets traded at the trade deadline, whatever the case may be. And first of all, Embiid needs to start playing some games. He needs to come back, be healthy, all that stuff. But let's say Embiid plays 65, 70 games, averages 32 and 11, and the Sixers have a top 2, top 3 record in the East without Ben Simmons. I don't know how it could be anybody other than Joel Embiid. And it's not just his impact on the team on the basketball court, the statistical impact, but keeping the team together, really, putting that team on his back from a mindset and a motivation standpoint, when it would be very easy for things to just crumble and fall apart with the weight of the Ben Simmons situation. It would be very easy to just be like, you know what, this guy's the most valuable player to his particular team. The city loves him. He changes everything for them. He's a fantastic two-way player. He's not just an offensive guy. He's a legitimate defensive player of the year caliber player on the other end of the floor as well. Let's just give the MVP to Joel Embiid. I could very easily see that narrative coming together. And there's some players that I haven't even talked about Luka on this list. There are a lot of other guys you could potentially put in this MVP conversation when it's very, very early. I mean, less than 20 games played, less than a quarter of the season has been played to this point. And of course, unfortunately, injuries are going to come into play for all this. But I wanted to point out some guys that I felt like had a legitimate chance to be real MVP candidates outside of just the favorites, right? Steph, KD, Jokic. I haven't even talked about LeBron. I haven't even talked about Anthony Davis. There's a ton of other guys that are going to, come into play here. But for me, if you're looking for overlooked guys that, potentially could have some value here, I'm going to go with these 5 players in terms of overlooked MVP candidates. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen, check out the socials in the description as well. And hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend as well, and I will see you all next time.